By accident, the Virgin slipped into his bed. The cowboy stayed awake all night, choosing her forever. The night sky over the Texas plains was dark and restless, filled with rolling clouds that moved like shadows chasing one another. The wind whipped through the tall grasses, making them bend and sway as if trying to tell a story no one could hear. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly lighting up the horizon and revealing the endless stretches of land that seemed to go on forever. Daniel Hayes, a young cowboy in his late 20s, worked late into the night. He had spent the entire afternoon checking his cattle, making sure each one was healthy and accounted for. His ranch was small compared to some of the sprawling estates in the area, but it had been in his family for generations, and he took pride in every corner of it. Daniel was not a man of many words. Most people in town described him as quiet, reliable, and serious. He preferred the company of his animals and the solitude of the land over the chaos of social gatherings. He enjoyed the routine of life on the ranch, the early mornings, the long hours under the sun, the peaceful evenings when the only sound was the gentle rustling of the wind and the occasional moo of a cow. Tonight, however, something about the air felt different. The storm approaching from the west carried an intensity he hadn't seen in weeks. It wasn't just the heavy clouds or the sharp gusts of wind. It was the sense that something unexpected was about to happen. Meanwhile, several miles away, Emily Carter sat nervously on a bus that was moving along the winding roads leading to a small town near Daniel's ranch. Emily was 21, with wide, curious eyes that reflected her cautious nature. She had grown up in a small, sheltered town and had lived her whole life under her parents' careful watch. Leaving home was her first step into independence, and while she was excited about starting a new job and meeting new people, she was also anxious. Everything about this journey was unfamiliar. The crowded bus, the strange passengers, the dark roads illuminated only by the headlights cutting through the night. The bus jolted slightly as it rounded a curve, and Emily gripped the edge of her seat. The driver warned passengers about the approaching storm, and the trees lining the road swayed violently in the wind. Rain began to fall, first in soft drops and then in heavier sheets that streaked the windows and blurred the lights outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the vehicle slightly, and Emily felt her heart beat faster. She wasn't afraid of storms. She had seen them before, but there was something about this night that made her uneasy. The combination of darkness, isolation, and the sound of the wind made her feel as if she were completely alone in the world. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. A massive branch had fallen across the road ahead, and the bus screeched to a halt. Passengers murmured and shifted in their seats, exchanging worried glances. The driver stepped out to inspect the situation, leaving the engine running so the passengers wouldn't be stranded completely in the storm. Emily, curious and restless, decided to step outside for a moment to breathe in the fresh, rain-soaked air. The wind was fierce, and she had to hold on to the railing to keep herself steady. Lightning flashed, illuminating the road in jagged streaks of white light, and she noticed the trees bending dangerously. Panic rose inside her, but before she could retreat back to the bus, a gust of wind caught her off guard. She stumbled, and in the chaos of the storm, she lost her sense of direction. Desperate for shelter, Emily's eyes scanned the area and caught sight of a dim light in the distance. At first, she thought it might be another vehicle, but as she drew closer, she realized it was coming from a small house. The warm glow of the light spilling through the window promised safety and comfort amid the storm. She ran toward it, her soaked coat clinging to her skin, and her heart racing from both fear and relief. By the time she reached the front porch, she was trembling from cold and exhaustion. She raised her hand to knock, but the wind was so strong that her attempt made no sound. The door, slightly ajar, moved with the gusts of wind, and Emily, driven by desperation, pushed it open. Inside, the house was quiet, warm, and surprisingly welcoming. A fire burned softly in the corner, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The smell of burning wood mixed with the faint scent of herbs and cleaning supplies gave the place a homely feel. Emily called out softly, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the storm outside. She didn't know who lived here, and she had no idea what she might find, but her need for shelter outweighed her caution. She wandered further inside, dripping wet and shivering. The house was modest but tidy. Photographs of landscapes and ranch animals hung on the walls, and a few pieces of simple furniture were arranged neatly. In the dim light, Emily felt a strange sense of calm despite the storm raging outside. She made her way down a narrow hallway and noticed a closed door at the end. Thinking it might be a bedroom, she entered quietly. Her mind was foggy from exhaustion and stress, and before she realized it, she had curled up on the edge of the bed. The warmth of the blankets and the soft mattress provided immediate relief, and her eyelids grew heavy. Outside the room, Daniel had returned from securing the barn, unaware that someone had entered his home. He pushed open the front door and shook the rain from his coat, whistling softly to calm his nerves. But as he walked toward his bedroom, he froze. There, under his blankets, was a young woman he had never seen before. His first instinct was surprise, followed quickly by a careful assessment. She was asleep, peaceful, and completely unaware of his presence. Her small, delicate features, the way her hair had fallen across the pillow, and the quiet rise and fall of her chest all spoke of innocence and vulnerability. Daniel's mind raced, but he didn't rush to action. He understood immediately that this was not a mischievous or reckless visitor. She must have sought shelter from the storm in desperation. Judging by her soaked clothes and trembling form, she was cold, exhausted, and frightened. He could have woken her abruptly, but something told him it would be better to wait, to ensure she was safe first. He quietly moved to a chair near the door and sat down, removing his hat and placing it gently on the table. From there, he could watch over her, making sure she was protected without invading her space or startling her. The night stretched on, the storm continuing to batter the small house. Rain tapped insistently against the windows, wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and occasional thunder made the floor shake. But inside that bedroom, under the soft glow of the firelight, Emily slept on, unaware that she had stumbled into a situation that could change both of their lives forever. Daniel, meanwhile, remained awake, alert, and patient, watching over her until morning, realizing that sometimes the right action was not the loudest or the boldest, but the quietest and the most careful. As the hours passed, the storm slowly began to weaken. The wind lost some of its bite and the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, but Daniel stayed alert, knowing that this night would be remembered, not for the storm, not for the lost bus, but for the choice he had made to remain awake, vigilant, and protective. He understood that the world could be harsh, that people often judged without knowing the full story, but he had made a decision to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. And so, under the dim light of the fire and the soft hum of the storm outside, the first part of their story unfolded. A night of uncertainty, of fear, of exhaustion, but also of quiet courage, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet understand. It was the night when a stranger found shelter, and a man stayed awake, ready to face whatever the morning would bring. The world outside might have been wild and unpredictable, but inside that small wooden house, something steady and unshakable had begun. The storm had not yet fully passed, but inside Daniel's small wooden house, the air was warmer, filled with the soft crackle of the dying fire. Outside, the wind still howled in distant gusts, and the occasional patter of rain against the roof reminded everyone that the night had been long and fierce. Emily Carter stirred in the bed, her mind half in sleep and half in a strange dream that seemed to carry the storm's intensity. She blinked several times, her thoughts slowly clearing, and realized that she was in an unfamiliar room. The warmth of the blankets and the faint smell of burning wood made her feel both comforted and confused. For a moment, panic gripped her. She sat up quickly, pulling the blankets around her, and her eyes searched the room. That's when she saw him. Daniel Hayes was sitting in a wooden chair across the room, his gaze steady but kind. His coat lay over the back of the chair, and his hat was on the table beside him. He was quiet, watching her without any trace of anger or suspicion. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anyone to be here. She hadn't expected him to be calm. Her first instinct was to apologize, but her voice trembled as she tried to speak. Daniel noticed her movement and stood up immediately, but slowly, deliberately, making sure he did not startle her. "You're safe," he said, his voice calm and low. "I didn't come near you while you were sleeping. I just stayed awake. Made sure you were okay." Emily's eyes widened. The seriousness in his tone, combined with the gentle concern on his face, surprised her. She had feared the worst, of being scolded, questioned, or judged, but this man, a complete stranger, had watched over her all night without taking advantage of her situation. It was a feeling she had never experienced before. Relief washed over her, mixed with a strange sense of admiration. I didn't mean to. I was just," she began, her words stumbling. She tried to explain, but she didn't know where to start. The storm, the bus, the lost path, everything seemed jumbled in her mind. Daniel nodded, understanding that no apology was necessary. He didn't need explanations. He simply offered a reassuring presence, showing her that she had nothing to fear. The room was quiet again, save for the soft hum of the fire and the occasional groan of the old wooden house as it settled. Emily noticed the small details: photographs of cattle and open fields, a simple wooden clock on the wall, a few books stacked neatly on a shelf. Everything spoke of a life that was simple but meaningful, a life grounded in care and responsibility. She realized that this man, Daniel, had lived alone for a long time, building his ranch and home with his own hands. She felt a strange sense of respect for him, mingled with gratitude for his silent protection. Daniel pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again, keeping a careful distance. He wanted to speak to ease her fears further, but he didn't want to rush her. Some things he knew could not be forced. Trust, he understood, had to be earned, and this young woman had already faced a frightening night. He simply waited, patient and steady, allowing her to regain her composure. Minutes passed like hours, but eventually Emily's breathing slowed. She looked at him and gave a small, shy smile. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." Her voice was barely audible, but Daniel heard it clearly. There was no pretense, no exaggeration, just honesty and sincerity. "You don't need to thank me," Daniel said softly. "I couldn't just let you face the storm alone. You were scared. I could see it. I stayed awake so you wouldn't have to be." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had never met anyone like Daniel before. In her life, people had always judged her or tried to control her. Here, in this quiet house on the edge of the plains, she had found someone who acted not out of expectation or reputation, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As the fire burned low, the two sat in silence, both aware of the unusual nature of the night. Emily began to feel slightly more at ease and decided to ask questions, not about him, but about the house, the ranch, and life on the plains. Daniel, in turn, found himself speaking more than he usually did, explaining his routine, his work, and the challenges of living alone. He described the cattle he tended, the crops he grew, and the quiet satisfaction of working with the land. Emily listened intently, fascinated by the simplicity and authenticity of his life. Hours seemed to pass in this way, measured not by clocks or time, but by the gentle warmth of the fire and the fading storm outside. Emily found herself forgetting the fear she had felt earlier. She even laughed softly at a story Daniel told about a mischievous calf that had escaped into the barn. The sound of her laughter was like a spark of sunlight breaking through the storm, and Daniel couldn't help but notice how bright it felt in the otherwise quiet house. The storm outside began to die down completely. Rain no longer fell in heavy sheets, but a gentle drizzle continued to tap against the roof. The wind softened, and the occasional cry of a distant animal punctuated the stillness. Daniel realized that dawn was approaching. He had stayed awake all night, making sure Emily remained safe and comfortable, but exhaustion was now starting to weigh heavily on him. Still, he didn't move to wake her. He knew she needed rest as much as she needed safety. Emily, meanwhile, slowly became aware of the passage of time. She realized the storm had not only forced her into a strange situation, but had also introduced her to someone she could trust in an unfamiliar world. Her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She realized that while the night had been frightening, it had also been transformative. She had experienced kindness, patience, and respect from a complete stranger. She had felt protected, not because someone was following rules or expectations, but simply because someone cared enough to stay awake through the storm. Finally, the first light of morning began to filter through the windows, casting soft golden hues across the room. Emily awoke fully, stretching and blinking against the brightness. Daniel was still there, sitting in the chair near the door. He gave her a small nod, acknowledging the new day. Emily felt a mixture of gratitude and relief. She knew she had been lucky to find shelter and safety in that storm. She also knew that this man, Daniel Hayes, had made a choice to do the right thing, simply because it was right. Emily sat up fully and smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. I should probably leave soon," she said softly. "The bus might be ready to continue, and I need to figure out how to get to town." Daniel shook his head gently. "Stay a little longer. Have some breakfast. The storm delayed everything, and you need time to recover." Emily hesitated, then nodded. She realized that staying a little longer would not only give her a chance to recover from the terrifying night, but also allow her to understand this man who had shown such quiet courage. She felt an unexpected curiosity about his life and about the world he inhabited. They moved to the kitchen, where Daniel prepared a simple breakfast of eggs, bread, and coffee. Emily watched as he moved with calm efficiency, tending to the small details of the kitchen, lighting the stove, and keeping the fire going. She felt a deep sense of comfort in the simplicity of his actions. There was no rush, no unnecessary conversation, just the quiet rhythm of a life lived with care and responsibility. As they ate, they spoke of small things: weather, the cattle, the distance to town, and the way the plains stretched endlessly in every direction. There was no awkwardness, no false pretenses, only honesty and genuine interest. Emily realized that she had never experienced such calm conversation with anyone her age. People in her hometown often talked over one another, or pretended to know more than they did. Here, in this quiet kitchen with a man who had stayed awake all night to protect her, she felt a rare and precious sense of peace. By the time breakfast was finished, the storm had passed completely. The sky cleared to reveal the pale blue of morning, and sunlight reflected off the wet fields and trees. Emily felt a sense of gratitude and quiet awe at the way the night had turned out. What had begun as a frightening, lonely journey had led her to a place of safety, kindness, and unexpected human connection. She realized that sometimes the most important moments in life came not when things were easy, but when circumstances forced people to show their true character. Daniel, for his part, observed her with a quiet satisfaction. He had not acted for recognition or praise. He had acted because it was right, but now, seeing the relief and gratitude in Emily's eyes, he felt a warmth that no amount of work on the ranch could give him. He had protected someone, and in doing so, he had begun a story that would not end with the storm. The first part of the day unfolded slowly. Emily prepared to leave for town, but before she could step outside, she turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said once more, "for everything. I don't think I'll ever forget this night." Daniel nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "You don't have to, but remember, storms don't always last. And sometimes the right people will appear when you need them most." With that, Emily stepped outside, her coat wrapped tightly around her, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on her face. The storm had ended, but the impact of the night would remain with her forever. She had come seeking shelter, but she had found more than that. She had found trust, protection, and the quiet courage of a man who chose to stay awake through the darkness, simply because it was the right thing to do. The morning sun rose slowly over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and gold. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a fresh, earthy scent in the air, and puddles reflected the brilliance of the dawn. Birds began to chirp, shaking off the dampness of the night, and the gentle rustle of leaves replaced the constant roar of wind that had filled the hours before. Inside the small wooden house, the warmth of the fire had faded to a comfortable glow, and the quiet hum of the morning created a calm atmosphere. Emily Carter had settled into a small chair by the kitchen window, watching the light touch the fields outside. She felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. The storm had forced her into a situation she would never have imagined, but it had also introduced her to someone who had shown her care, patience, and honesty in a way that she had never experienced before. Her mind kept returning to the events of the night, the wind, the sudden danger, and the man who had stayed awake just to protect her. She felt a deep gratitude that went beyond simple words. Daniel Hayes moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, preparing a modest breakfast. The clinking of dishes and the soft hiss of cooking filled the room, but there was no rush in his movements. Each action seemed deliberate, measured, and calm, as if he had done it countless times before. He noticed Emily watching him, her eyes wide with interest, and he offered a small nod. "Sit tight," he said gently. "We'll have breakfast ready soon." Emily smiled, her nerves slowly calming. The tension of the night was beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of safety and comfort. She realized that, for the first time in her life, she was in a place where she could simply be herself without fear of judgment. Daniel's presence was steady, quiet, and unassuming, but it carried a kind of strength that made her feel protected. She wondered about his life, about the years he had spent on this land, and about the person he had become through the challenges he had faced. As they ate, conversation began naturally, as if the night's events had broken a barrier that words alone could not. Daniel spoke about the ranch, about the cattle, the routines of caring for the land, and the unpredictable nature of life in such a remote area. Emily listened attentively, fascinated by the rhythm of his life. She asked questions, her curiosity growing with each answer, and Daniel answered with patience and honesty. There was no pretense in his words, no desire to impress or boast, just simple, clear explanations about a life lived with responsibility and care. Emily shared a little about herself as well, though cautiously at first. She spoke of her family, the town she had grown up in, and her decision to take a job in a new place. She did not go into detail about her fears or her lack of experience, but Daniel could see the underlying courage in her decision to leave her comfort zone. He admired it quietly, though he did not say so outright. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, and offered small words of encouragement that were sincere without being overbearing. The two of them fell into a comfortable rhythm, speaking in turns, listening and learning about one another. Daniel noticed the small details about Emily, the way her eyes widened with curiosity, the soft tone of her voice when she was thoughtful, and the occasional nervous gesture when she wasn't sure what to say. Emily noticed the quiet strength in Daniel, the way he moved with purpose, the steady gaze he held, and the calm way he seemed to take life as it came, without unnecessary worry. Outside, the storm's aftermath created a sense of renewal. The grass sparkled with dew, the trees glistened under the sunlight, and the distant hills seemed to stretch endlessly, promising freedom and space. Emily felt as if the storm had not only washed away the rain, but also the uncertainty and fear she had carried with her. She realized that the night had been more than just a frightening experience. It had been an awakening. She had encountered courage, patience, and integrity in someone who had done nothing but what was right. After breakfast, Emily helped clear the dishes, and Daniel allowed her to do so. He appreciated her willingness, and it gave her a sense of purpose and contribution. The simple acts of working together, even for a few minutes, created a subtle bond between them. Emily realized that she was beginning to trust this man not because she had to, but because his actions over the night had shown her that he was dependable, honorable, and kind. The morning wore on, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Emily knew that she would eventually need to continue her journey to town, but she found herself reluctant to leave. The house, the ranch, and the man who had protected her all night had become a temporary refuge, a place where she had felt safe in a way that was rare in her life. She wondered if she would ever find another moment of such simplicity and honesty. Daniel noticed her hesitation but did not press. He understood that leaving or staying was her choice. What mattered was that she had been safe through the night and that the events of the storm had passed without harm. Yet he felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing her calm demeanor and the small smile that occasionally appeared on her face. He realized that sometimes the right choice was not about words or actions, it was about presence. Being there, quietly and consistently, could matter more than anything else. Emily finally spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You stayed awake all night, watching over me. You didn't even know me, and yet..." Her voice trailed off. She realized that words alone could not capture the gratitude she felt. Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "You don't need to thank me," he said again. "I did what I thought was right. You were in trouble, and I made sure you were safe. That's all." Emily looked at him, sensing the quiet integrity behind his words. She felt a respect and admiration that went beyond simple gratitude. There was a sense of safety and trust that she had not known she could feel with someone she had only just met. She realized that this man, Daniel Hayes, had shown her a rare quality. He had chosen honor when it was not required, and he had acted with patience, care, and thoughtfulness. Time seemed to slow as the morning continued. They spoke more about the land, the animals, and life in the wide-open spaces of the Texas plains. Daniel told stories of his childhood, of learning to ride horses, tend cattle, and live independently. Emily shared more about her own life, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. The conversation was light at times, serious at others, but always honest. There were no pretenses, no hidden motives, just two people sharing their lives and thoughts in a rare moment of trust and understanding. By midday, Emily realized that leaving would soon become necessary. The bus would eventually resume its journey, and she had responsibilities awaiting her in the town. Yet she did not feel rushed. She had found clarity and calm in Daniel's presence, and she knew that whatever happened next, she would carry the memory of this morning with her. She had learned that courage could be quiet, that kindness could be steady, and that trust could be earned, not through words, but through actions. Daniel helped her gather her things when the time came. He walked her to the door and opened it for her, a simple act that spoke volumes about his character. Emily stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze on her face. The storm had ended, but its effects remained. Fresh puddles reflected the sky, the grass was vibrant with moisture, and the air was crisp and clean. She turned back toward the house, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw understanding, patience, and quiet strength in his gaze, and she felt a deep connection that transcended words. Before leaving, she spoke softly. "I'll never forget this. Thank you for everything." Daniel nodded, a small, sincere smile on his face. "Take care," he said. "And remember, storms don't last forever. Sometimes the right people show up when you need them most." Emily stepped away, her heart lightened, and began walking toward the road where the bus would soon arrive. The field stretched endlessly around her, the sun casting long shadows that danced across the ground. She reflected on the night, on Daniel, and on the lessons she had learned, about courage, patience, and the quiet ways in which people could show care. As she moved forward, Emily realized that life was full of unexpected moments and that sometimes the most significant experiences came from situations that seemed frightening or uncertain. The night of the storm had changed her perspective not only on trust and safety but also on the value of quiet, steadfast courage. She knew that she would carry the memory of Daniel's actions with her forever, a reminder that integrity and kindness could exist even in the most unexpected places. Back at the ranch, Daniel returned to his daily routine, tending to the small chores left from the storm. Yet, a quiet satisfaction lingered in his heart. He had done what he believed was right, without seeking recognition or reward, and that alone was enough. He knew that the events of the night were only the beginning of something larger, though neither he nor Emily could see it yet. The storm had passed, but the bond formed in the quiet hours of vigilance had planted the seeds for trust, friendship, and perhaps something deeper in the future. And so, the morning unfolded peacefully, a new day rising over the plains. The storm was gone, but its story had only just begun, a story of unexpected encounters, quiet courage, and the beginnings of a connection that would continue to grow as the days passed. The storm had passed completely, leaving the plains fresh and sparkling in the sunlight. Emily Carter's visit to Daniel Hayes' ranch had changed something inside her. She had expected a simple, scary night and maybe a brief story to tell later, but instead, she had experienced something she could not put into words. Daniel had shown her patience, care, and integrity in ways she had never encountered before. Even as she traveled back toward town, she could not stop thinking about him and the calm strength he had displayed all through the night. The town was small, quiet, and filled with familiar faces. But after the events of the previous night, Emily felt different. She felt braver, more confident, and also more aware of the kindness that existed in the world, even in unexpected places. She shared the story carefully with a few people she trusted, and they listened with polite interest, but the real change was in her own heart. She knew what had happened at Daniel's house was not just a coincidence. It was the beginning of a bond formed in a moment of need, and she could not ignore the feeling that this was important. Word, however, had a way of spreading quickly in small towns. It wasn't long before people began noticing Emily's unusual route and the unusual stop she had made. Curious whispers followed her through the streets, and she could sense the eyes watching her in the store, at the market, and at the diner where she had gone for lunch. Some of the townsfolk raised questions quietly, wondering why a young woman had been at a stranger's house on the edge of the plains. Rumors started to form, though none of them had any real basis. When Emily learned about the gossip, she felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. She had been trying to handle the situation responsibly and with gratitude, but she had not expected people to misunderstand or judge so quickly. She realized that small towns often had tight-knit communities where news traveled faster than truth. Yet, she also realized that she could not change what people thought. She could only tell her own story, calmly and honestly. Meanwhile, Daniel was aware of the whispers reaching town. He had not sought attention or recognition for staying awake through the storm, and he had no desire for gossip to define him. He was used to living quietly, tending his ranch, and keeping his life simple. Yet he could not ignore the fact that rumors could affect Emily. He knew how judgmental people could be and how quickly they could spread assumptions. Daniel felt a quiet responsibility to protect her reputation, just as he had protected her safety. Emily made a choice that surprised even herself. Instead of avoiding Daniel's ranch or pretending nothing had happened, she returned to him the following day. She wanted to thank him properly and acknowledge the care he had shown her. When she arrived, Daniel was tending to the cattle, guiding a few of the younger animals into the barn. The sun shone down on his broad shoulders, and the quiet rhythm of his movements showed a man who worked steadily, without complaint or distraction. Emily approached him, her heart beating with nervous anticipation. "Good morning, Daniel," she said softly. I wanted to thank you again for everything last night. I don't want you to think I've forgotten." Daniel looked up, brushing his hands on his jeans, and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't need to thank me again. I was just doing what felt right. You were in danger, and I stayed awake so you could be safe. That's all." Emily nodded. But she realized that she wanted the world to understand what had happened, not just in terms of gratitude, but in terms of truth. She wanted people to know that Daniel's actions had been honorable and kind, and not anything else that rumors might suggest. She felt a courage rising in her chest, a willingness to speak up for him even in the face of gossip. When she returned to town later that day, she did so with honesty and calm determination. She spoke with neighbors, clerks in stores, and even casual acquaintances, sharing the story exactly as it had happened. She explained the storm, the bus, her own confusion and fear, and how Daniel had stayed awake all night to protect her. She described his patience, his respect for her space, and the integrity he had shown. People listened, some surprised, some skeptical, and some thoughtful. Slowly, the tone of conversation began to shift. Where gossip had assumed wrongdoing, the truth revealed courage and honor. Emily's voice carried sincerity, and even the most doubtful neighbors could sense that she was telling the truth. Daniel's character, once judged unfairly, began to regain the respect he deserved. The shift in perception, affected Emily as well. She realized that telling the truth had not only defended Daniel, but it also strengthened her own sense of integrity and confidence. She had faced the judgment of others calmly, shared her perspective clearly, and stood up for what she believed in. She felt proud of herself, not because she had forced anyone to listen, but because she had spoken honestly and respectfully. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his daily work, unaware of the subtle changes taking place in town. He tended the cattle, mended fences, and repaired the barn doors that the storm had damaged. Life on the ranch returned to its normal rhythm, but there was a quiet energy in the air, a sense that something meaningful had occurred beyond the routine of everyday life. Daniel noticed small gestures from Emily, visits to check on the ranch, and the way she spoke to him with genuine curiosity and respect. He began to feel a connection that went beyond simple gratitude, a bond that was growing quietly, steadily, and naturally. Over the next few days, Emily spent more time at the ranch. She helped with small tasks, asking questions and observing Daniel's work. He taught her how to feed the younger animals, how to check fences for damage, and how to recognize signs of illness in cattle. She listened attentively, eager to learn, and Daniel noticed her dedication. It wasn't that she was forced to stay. She came willingly, drawn by curiosity, respect, and perhaps a subtle sense of companionship. As they worked together, conversation flowed easily. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Emily learned about Daniel's childhood, the hardships he had faced, and the way he had built his life from the ground up. She admired his determination, his honesty, and his patience. Daniel, in turn, discovered qualities in Emily that he respected: her courage to leave home, her willingness to learn, and the quiet integrity with which she approached life. Small towns, however, are never quiet for long. While some had begun to understand the truth, others still whispered and watched. But Emily and Daniel no longer paid attention to idle gossip. They focused on what mattered: the growing trust between them, the shared moments on the ranch, and the sense that they were building something meaningful together. The storm had brought them together, and now their connection grew not through words alone, but through actions, shared experiences, and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Emily and Daniel stood at the edge of the fields, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The day had been long, filled with work, conversation, and small moments of laughter. Emily felt a deep sense of peace, realizing that she had found someone she could trust completely. Daniel, standing beside her, felt the same, though neither spoke of it directly. The bond between them was quiet but strong, built on patience, honesty, and the courage to do what was right. They knew that small towns could be harsh and judgmental, but they also knew that truth and integrity mattered more than rumors. By facing the whispers calmly and honestly, Emily had shown courage, and Daniel had demonstrated steadfast character. Together, they had created a foundation of trust, one that would grow steadily as long as they nurtured it. As the evening turned to night, they returned to the house. The fire was lit, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. Dinner was simple but comforting, and conversation flowed easily. They spoke of ordinary things: the weather, the animals, and the daily tasks of ranch life. But underneath these simple topics, a deeper connection continued to grow. Each glance, each small gesture, built an unspoken understanding between them. By the time the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Emily realized that she no longer felt the fear and uncertainty that had accompanied her through the storm. She felt secure, valued, and respected. Daniel, watching her quietly, felt the same sense of calm satisfaction he had experienced the night she first arrived at his house. They had both chosen to act with patience and integrity, and now they shared the rewards: trust, respect, and a bond that had begun under extraordinary circumstances but would continue in ordinary life. The town would continue to talk. Rumors might start again. But Emily and Daniel knew the truth, and that was enough. Their connection was built not on hearsay, but on shared experience, honesty, and the courage to stand by what was right. The storm had brought them together, and now their actions and choices would carry them forward. The seeds of friendship, respect, and perhaps something deeper had been planted, and, with care, they would grow into something lasting and meaningful. And so, the day ended with peace over the plains, quiet strength in the small house, and a bond that had survived both the storm. The night had been frightening, the morning enlightening, and now the days ahead promised growth, understanding, and the slow but steady building of something beautiful between two people who had been brought together by chance, but had chosen each other with care and integrity. Days turned into weeks on the Texas plains, and life at Daniel Hayes' ranch continued with its steady rhythm. The storm that had brought Emily Carter into his life was now a distant memory, but its effects were still very much alive. Their friendship had grown quietly, built on trust, honesty, and shared experience. Each day, Emily spent more time at the ranch, learning small tasks from Daniel, exploring the fields, and observing the animals. She had begun to feel at home in the wide open spaces, a place where life moved at its own pace and each action had meaning. Daniel, for his part, had become more aware of Emily's presence than he had expected. At first, he had treated her visits as simple acts of kindness, moments to share his knowledge and ensure she was safe. But gradually, he began to notice the little things. The way her eyes lit up when she understood a new task, the quiet confidence she displayed when facing challenges, and the gentle way she spoke to the animals. Her courage and patience impressed him, and he found himself looking forward to her visits in a way he could not yet fully explain. Emily, too, felt something changing within herself. She had always been cautious, sheltered, and careful not to draw attention. Yet here in the open fields and quiet house, she discovered a sense of freedom and confidence she had never known. She realized that Daniel's calm guidance and unwavering respect had given her the courage to trust, to explore, and to embrace life beyond the narrow paths she had always known. She had expected the stormy night to be frightening, but it had become a turning point in her life, a moment that opened her heart and mind to new possibilities. The people in town had begun to accept the truth of that night as well. Emily's honest account of what had happened gradually replaced the gossip. Those who had whispered about the incident now recognized Daniel's integrity and Emily's honesty. While a few skeptics remained, most had come to understand that no wrongdoing had occurred, and that both Daniel and Emily had acted with dignity and respect. The small town had witnessed the story of courage, patience, and truth unfold, and it had quietly changed the way people thought about both of them. One late afternoon, Emily and Daniel worked together in the barn repairing a section of fence damage during the storm. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the floor, and the air was filled with the scent of hay, wood, and the faint earthy aroma of the fields outside. Emily held a hammer carefully, listening to Daniel's instructions, while he guided her hand with patience and precision. The quiet moments between words allowed them to connect in ways that were deeper than conversation. Actions, shared work, and mutual respect had become the foundation of their growing bond. As they worked, Daniel spoke softly about life on the ranch, the responsibilities he carried, and the small joys that often went unnoticed. Emily listened, fascinated by the rhythm and simplicity of a life so different from her own. She realized that courage was not only about facing storms or danger, it was also about tending to daily responsibilities, showing care for others, and acting with honesty in every small moment. Daniel had shown her that courage and integrity were woven into ordinary life as much as they were revealed in extraordinary situations. Later that evening, after the work was done, they sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, stretching endlessly over the plains. Emily felt a deep sense of peace, realizing that she had found someone who valued honesty, trust, and respect as much as she did. Daniel felt a similar sense of calm, knowing that their connection was built on shared values and understanding, rather than fleeting attraction or shallow words. Emily turned to Daniel, her voice soft. "I never expected to find a place like this, or someone like you. You've shown me so much kindness and patience. I feel different because of it." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady and thoughtful. "It wasn't difficult. You needed someone to make sure you were safe, and I wanted to help, but I'm glad it had the effect it did. I've learned a lot, too. You've reminded me of the joy in seeing life through fresh eyes." The days continued in this quiet rhythm, with Emily learning more about ranch life and Daniel growing more aware of his feelings for her. They laughed together over small mistakes, shared meals at the end of long workdays, and sometimes sat in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. Their connection deepened naturally, without rush or pressure, rooted in respect, trust, and a shared understanding of what was truly important. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they walked to the edge of the pasture together. The sun was setting, casting soft light across the fields. Emily noticed the way Daniel moved with quiet confidence, and she realized she felt a sense of safety simply being near him. Daniel noticed Emily's relaxed posture and calm expression, and he understood that their bond had grown beyond friendship. There was something unspoken but undeniable between them, a trust and care that could not be ignored. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Emily, I need to tell you something. That night, when you were here during the storm, I stayed awake because I wanted to make sure you were safe. But more than that, I realized something about myself. I felt something I can't ignore. I want you to know that I've chosen to be there for you, not just that night, but from now on, if you'll let me." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had felt the same growing bond, the same respect and trust, but hearing him say it aloud filled her with a warmth and certainty she could not deny. "Daniel, I feel the same," she said softly. "I trust you, and I want to be here with you too." That evening marked a turning point in their relationship, The connection that had begun on a stormy night had now blossomed into something deeper, built on trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. They did not rush, they did not force anything, they simply acknowledged the feelings that had grown naturally between them. Their bond was steady, calm, and strong, much like the land around them, enduring, reliable, and full of quiet beauty. Over the following days, Emily and Daniel spent more time together, not out of necessity, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They explored the fields, tended to the animals, and shared stories of their pasts, hopes, and dreams. Emily found herself feeling safe, valued, and understood in ways she had never imagined. Daniel discovered the joy of companionship, the warmth of shared laughter, and the fulfillment that came from being with someone who respected him and shared his values. The town continued to notice Emily's visits to the ranch, but the whispers had largely faded. People began to recognize the truth of their bond, that it was built on honesty, respect, and trust, rather than gossip or misunderstanding. Emily and Daniel no longer felt the need to explain themselves. Their actions spoke louder than words, and their steady connection became a quiet example for those around them. One evening, as the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Emily and Daniel sat together on the porch, watching the moonlight reflect off the fields. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant wood smoke. Emily leaned slightly closer, feeling the comfort and security of Daniel's presence. He placed his hand gently on hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They did not need to rush, for the bond between them was already strong, built over weeks of shared experience, patience, and understanding. "I think I've found my place here," Emily said quietly. "Not just on the ranch, but with you. You've shown me what it means to be safe, respected, and cared for. I feel at home." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "And I've realized that I've found something I didn't even know I needed. I've learned that protecting someone, being there for them, and choosing to act with care, it matters more than I thought. And now, I choose you. Not just for a day, not just for a storm, but for all the days ahead." Emily's eyes filled with tears of happiness. She had expected the storm to be frightening, but it had led her to something far greater: trust, understanding, and a love built on respect. "I choose you too," she whispered. From that night forward, life at the ranch carried a new meaning. Emily and Daniel's bond deepened with each passing day. They worked together, laughed together, and supported one another through the ordinary challenges of ranch life. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but its impact would last forever. They had chosen each other not out of convenience or circumstance, but because they had recognized the qualities in one another that mattered most: honesty, patience, courage, and integrity. As the sun set over the plains, Emily and Daniel stood together, watching the colors of the sky stretch endlessly. They knew that life would bring challenges, storms, and uncertainties, but they also knew that their bond was strong enough to face anything. They had chosen one another, and that choice was steady, enduring, and full of promise. In the quiet beauty of the Texas plains under the wide sky, Emily and Daniel realized that love was not loud, flashy, or rushed. It was calm, patient, and built on trust. It was the courage to protect, the patience to wait, and the decision to choose each other every day. And in that moment, with the world stretching endlessly before them, they knew that they had found something lasting, something real, something worth holding on to forever.